When you think of a Viking, what do you picture? Who are they? What do they look like? And what are they wearing? If you're someone who thinks of a big helmet with the two horns sticking out on the side, you're not alone. Many people think of that when they think of the Vikings. But did Vikings really wear these big horned helmets, or did we just pick that up somewhere in the mythology? Stay tuned as we explore that in this episode. Hello, welcome back to Nomads of the North. My name is Brittany. I'm your host, an amateur history lover, your everyday historian, just trying to make sense of everything that happened during the Viking Age. So if you love Viking history, early European history, or even if you're just interested in how migration and movement and all of these things that happened so long ago still impact things that are happening today, who we are, language, landscape, all of that, then welcome. This is the right place for you. I'm also a big fan of making history personal, so I'm always going to share ways to do that in every single episode, because sometimes it's easy to think, oh, that's history for them or history about that. But really, history is just a collection of stories, and the things that we learn now can help us not only understand the present better, but can help us better plan for the future. And I truly believe that when it comes to the Viking Age, because so much of what's happening in the world now, when it comes to migration, immigration, we can look back to what was happening then and think, was that good? Was that bad? Could we copy that? Could we avoid that? And one of those things is the idea of pictures in our minds, right? We get pictures in our minds of these different things that happen. One thing we like to do on this podcast and on this YouTube channel is to bust myths and answer frequently asked questions. And this is definitely a frequently searched one. Did Vikings really have horned helmets? So that's what we're diving into today. The quick answer is, from what we can tell, no. But if that's the case, then where did this imagery come from? Well, we can thank a classical musician for that. You might have heard of the song The Rise of the Valkyries. The ring cycle costumes feature that. You have these women, they're wearing these horned helmets, and there is some evidence to suggest that this kind of helmet comes from a ceremonial helmet that might have been used by villagers in the Scandinavian countries in that region of the world during that time period. But we have to remember that the Vikings weren't a particular people group. A Viking was a profession, right? We can really liken it to a pirate nowadays. So Vikings had all kinds of ethnicities, even though most of them happened to be of Nordic or Scandinavian descent. But over time, that definitely blended. You had Vikings in northern France. You had Vikings across Germany, settling in England, Ireland. You had Vikings in Iceland. So even though these cultures are all very similar now, they would have had many differences back then, especially when you think of the early Christians in monasteries on the islands off the coast of these nations. But we'll get into that more in another episode. We have to think about what would have been practical for the Vikings to wear during that time. Obviously, they were raiding and trading. They had to be ready for battle at basically any time. So wearing a horned helmet isn't exactly practical. To this day, as of when I'm recording this episode, there's only been one complete Viking helmet found. It's known as the Gjermundsbu helmet, and hopefully I pronounced that right. I'm still learning the languages. Found on a farm in Norway in the 1940s. And as you can see, I'll put a picture of it up on the screen if I can. It looks very different. And as I mentioned before, the horned helmets do exist. They did exist, but we haven't found evidence that the Vikings wore them while they were out doing their Viking activities. From what we can tell, the horned helmets were worn during Bronze Age ceremonies. And when we think about the time period that the Vikings come from, it's easy to see that snapshot of history, right? The 8th to the 11th century, thereabouts. But if we think about the horned helmets coming from the Bronze Age, that would have been much earlier, between 1700 to 500 years before the Common Era, or BC. And before what we know now about the Viking Age and what Nordic countries would have been doing then, they would have had the earlier Nordic Bronze Age, where there was a lot of metalworking, a really rich culture, not too different from what would have been happening during the Viking period, because there was definitely still a lot of seafaring going on. These are people that mastered the sea. And when we think about the Vikings and why they were so successful, one big reason is the fact that they just had technology and knowledge. They had the long ships that allowed them to go very far distances relatively quickly. And then once they got a sail on that ship, it was over for everybody else. We'll talk more about that in the future too. By the way, I love sailing, so I'm excited to talk about that. As an aside, we have so many words and phrases in the English language that come from sailing terminology. So it is really interesting to know what those words are, what they mean, the history of those words, if for no other reason than just to have a better grasp of the English language, which so many people speak today. So if Vikings didn't really wear the horned helmets, what did they wear in battle? From what we know, they would have worn an iron helmet that would have gone around their whole head, obviously with a nose guard and carved out eyes with room for their eyes to see. If they were wealthy, they likely would have worn chainmail, leather armor, and padded tunics would have been more common. So it's kind of funny to even think about that. When we think about the average person during the Viking Age in that region of the world, Northern Europe, Western Europe, they would have looked just like peasants. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I just mean that's what everybody wore. They would have wore clothes that were maybe wool, maybe leather. Remember that back then wool was very expensive. You were considered wealthy to have many sheep. Shields and spears would have been the most common weapons, which that alone is very interesting because another thing we usually think of when we think of Vikings, when we're talking about stereotypes anyway, is axes, which yes, axes definitely existed then too, and there were still bows and arrows in use for sure. But when we consider how little room there would have been in their boats, by the way, to carry these heavy things and to be able to carry all the stuff back with them, from what I can tell, from what I've found, is they wanted to wear armor that was practical. They wanted weapons that were practical. So we have to consider that. They probably wouldn't wanted a lot of flesh or bulk or too many layers while they were traveling. Now, at home, in their very, very cold climates, although the other places they went to were pretty cold and mild too, they would have wanted to layer. So why does this myth matter? Why did I choose to make an episode about this? Well, one, because it's fun, and it was a frequently asked / searched question. But also, when we think about pop culture, I mean, I want you to just take a second. Are there any movies or TV shows that you can think of where Vikings have come up? There are so many, right? The TV show Vikings, The Last Kingdom's a great one, but even a more family-friendly one, Thor from the Marvel movies. So it makes sense that we would get certain pictures in our mind of what would have happened, what was real, based on what we see in movies and TV shows and popular media and culture. And while all of that stuff is so fun, and I've even kind of noticed a certain vibe among other people who are into Viking stuff, like there's certain things that many people in this culture, in this space do, you likely do them too, and if so, it's fine, right? But I think what happens is when we lean too heavily into a certain stereotype, or when we make assumptions about a certain people group or a certain time period because of what's immediately available to us in popular media, then it's easy for us to really simplify who the Vikings were, what was happening, why they did what they did. And even though technology has changed, culture definitely has, people haven't really changed that much. That's my personal belief anyway, in the sense of we all want the same things, right? We all want a sense of belonging. We want to feel safe and secure in our homes. We want for our children to grow up well. We want prosperity for our own country and for our family and for our nation. So it's important to me to be able to bust some of these myths and to also spur you on and get you more curious and interested to look and research further. Thankfully, the museums in Nordic countries are so open and generous with sharing what they've learned and what they found. So I'll be sure to link some of those resources if you are interested in learning more about Viking weaponry and what they would have worn during that time. And thank you so much for watching or listening to this point. It's not lost on me that you've chosen to spend part of your day with me. Again, my name is Brittany, founder of Nomads of the North. If you liked this video / episode, go ahead and like it. If you're watching on a platform that lets you do that, it just lets them know that we're doing a good job. And if you have any questions or anything to add to the conversation, I'm definitely not the leading expert. I'm learning a lot of this myself. I would love to hear your takeaways and anything you found interesting here in the comments below. And feel free to send me an email if you'd like to talk further or ask me a question or maybe even suggest a future episode. You can send an email to Brittany@nomadsofthenorth.com.